Hey everybody, this is Clark from Cali Paddler, and I have the pleasure of speaking with my friend Ty today. Ty has got a background with Coast Guard, and recently there's been some situations where folks have maybe had radio contact with the Coast Guard or some emergency services, and it's becoming common that we carry marine radios, but I wanted to speak with somebody who knows a lot more about it than I do. And Ty agreed to kind of hang out today. So, hey, welcome, Ty. Thanks for being here.
Right on. How's it, Clark? Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely, man. It's always good to connect with you, dude. Hey,
Same here.
I'd love to hear a little bit of background on you, paddling, boating. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and why it's so great that we can have you on here today.
Oh, right on. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. First thing about me, I grew up around the ocean, small town, Kailua, on the island of Oahu. And, I've been fascinated with water rescue, search and rescue, that sort of thing. That kind of led me to joining the Coast Guard many years ago. This past year in November, I retired from the Coast Guard after 22 years. While I was in the Coast Guard, I was a helicopter rescue swimmer and, spent a lot of time around the ocean, diving, sailing, surfing, and in the most recent years, paddling. Paddling is my passion these days. And, but I always have my ears open, when I hear about mishaps. And recently in our community, the paddling community, we've had quite a few. So I'm glad that you brought me on to chat, and hopefully I can share some of my experience with others, and we can kind of create this narrative of ingraining safety into our paddling and keep people safe and have fun on the water.
Perfect. Right on. So, I mean, safety doesn't have to be something we even think about. Like to use the word you used, ingrained, it can just be kind of a commonplace that we take certain precautions that maybe we take for granted. I think there's one thing in particular that you can help us with today, kind of the use of the marine radio, the VHF radio. It's new technology, although it's got some new things built into it, but more and more I'm finding that it's got some benefits that can help paddlers if they have one with them. And maybe not all the time, although there's no harm in that, but in certain situations maybe, but people I think are starting to carry them more. What are your thoughts of having a marine radio when you paddle? What are some of the benefits when we're out in the water, and maybe compared to like a cell phone or something, whereas this can help to have with us?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And to answer your question right off, it's a great idea to carry a VHF radio with you. There's so many on the market today. They're inexpensive, they're compact, they work well. Something to keep in mind with these handheld type VHF radios is that they work as line of sight. So if you're going to go out on a long, far away paddle, you want to keep that in your risk assessment analysis before you go, right? Because line of sight means if I can see the shoreline, then they can probably hear me. So that's something to be mindful of. A lot of these radios outside of just a few miles, they become inoperable. So, if you think you're going to go out 10 miles straight offshore and you'll be fine, the horizon starts to bend, it's not going to work the way you thought it was going to work. So just keep that in always in your perspective. As far as like the proper use of radios, the biggest thing with radio communication is you want to keep it limited, right? You don't want to be chattering on the radio. And if you're going to call for help, especially if you're going to call the Coast Guard, you want that to be direct. Some of the things that we would want to hear back from, say, somebody who is in distress would be, 1, the nature of your distress. 2, how many people are with you? 3, do you have life jackets on board? And if so, they're going to ask you to don them, right? That sort of thing. You might get asked a few other questions like where you are. If you have a GPS, which is another great device to have, they're also becoming smaller and smaller over the years. Now we got them on our watches, and if you can give them an estimated position, that's helpful too. So if they send out a boat crew or if they send out a helicopter to come look for you, they're going to be able to narrow that search area down. And another helpful tool would be an ELT. or often referred to as a PLB, a personal locator beacon, you know, and I think ACR is one of the companies that manufactures those. And, you know, they're about the size of smaller than your cell phone, you know what I mean? And so you can, you know, like you said, right? Like a lot of, oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this, but oftentimes a lot of paddlers go out and we just board shorts, no shirt, maybe one bottle of water, maybe not, and we just go, right? It's just kind of like that freedom of getting on the water and going out and having fun.
Yeah.
Most days, that's fine, right? We don't run into issues. We do it all the time. We're accustomed to it. You know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking if I have an issue here, I'm typically with friends, or if I'm solo, you know, I tend to stick closer to shore, you know, within reason. I'm like, okay, like if I had to swim from here, this is a far swim, but I can do it, you know, and that's not always an option for every paddler. And I think that that's something that each individual paddler, it's like a conversation you have to have with yourself each day you go out on the water, you know, like a mini, what we would refer to as a risk assessment, right? Or a risk analysis. And, you know, like I accept that risk oftentimes and I go out and I do what I do. Is it wise? Probably not, you know. If something happened, I might rethink like what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. But I will say this on this point is I'm talking about nice sunny day, water's flat. I've done it a million times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's elevate that game, right? Let's say we're going to go out, we're going to do this gnarly downwinder, right? Wind smoking, not even crazy smoking, like within my limits, you know, 10, 15 mile an hour, 20 maybe gusts. I'm going to reassess that, you know, I'm going to bring a leash, you know, that's one of the things I'm going to do. And I might bring more water. I'm going to start looking at my safety equipment. What am I carrying on me? And that's key when it comes to your equipment, you know, whether it's your signaling devices, that would include your radio, your PLB, a signal mirror for flashing down people.
Signal mirror. Okay, that's
Yeah,
something
signal
new.
mirrors are really small and they work really well, you know, and carrying a whistle is also important. The Fox 40 is a great one because it's tiny, it's bright orange, it's easy to put in your mouth when you're cold. There's sea dive markers. I mean, you can go full send with your safety you know, kit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really up to you, you know, and, you know, me personally, I don't want to lug around this big, massive kit full of all these things that are going to be helpful if I'm in a situation like that. But if I'm planning on doing a gnarly run, I just might, you know, I might just bring more than I would. I can guarantee I would bring more than I would on a nice sunny day paddle. And I think that if there's anything I want to share with your audience today is that's the way to look at it. You know, make a risk assessment each day, decide, you know, when you're going to go paddle and decide, am what I'm wearing right now, if I'm stuck in the water for a long period of time, am I going to be comfortable? Mm-hmm. Am I going to survive? Right? That's kind of the idea you want to, because you get separated from your canoe. It's just going to be you out there in the water, right? That's a game changer. So I think the biggest thing is oftentimes people go out in the ocean and they bring some equipment with them and they think that the Coast Guard or the lifeguard service is like, this is what I'm going to do if I get into a problem. And that's fine. I would only caution against that as your sole way out, because a lot can go wrong with our lifeguard service or our Coast Guard. You know, they have assets that could break down, you know, there's a million things that can go wrong on that end. So if that's your sole rescue platform, you might need to rethink your risk assessment. And, you know, and I'll give you some examples of this. So let's say you and I are going to go surf at Mission Beach, right? Mm-hmm. Nice sunny day. It's about 3 to 5 feet Hawaiian, right? We're probably going to go out there in board shorts. You know, it's the middle of summer. We're not going to have any kind of rescue stuff on us. We're going to go out there. We're going to have a blast, right? But now let's say we go surf Point Loma and it's 10 foot. That's going to change the game a bit, right? Now we might be looking at, okay, how are we going to have, maybe we'll have a jet ski on scene. You know, maybe we'll be wearing an inflatable vest if it's that big, right? but you'll take a bigger leash. These little details, right? You're gonna change it. And I think that's the same approach we want to take with paddling. You know, if we're gonna go out on a smoking day, go with friends, right? Go with people who know what they're doing, and build your level of comfort up. Don't make your first downwind day be on a 35 mile an hour, you know, downwind run from Malibu to wherever. You know, you got to really think about this and create this conversation between yourself, if it's just you and you're going solo, or your partners. And that way everybody's kind of has this, you know, safety first approach. Because when things go bad, oftentimes, you know, and even with me, I over the years have prepared for the things that I've seen and the things that situations I've seen others put themselves in, right? And something, I kid you not, something will always come from a direction you never saw coming. It happens every time on the water. And so the more that, sorry, my wife doesn't realize I'm doing an interview.
That's all right. She can be a part of the video.
But yeah, no, I just wanted to say that. And if there's any other questions that you have.
Right on. Good stuff, man. Yeah, tons of questions. Assessment risk, assessment plan, it can change based on what we're doing in the day. You mentioned the radios with new technology like personal locator beacons or PLB, safety whistles, safety mirror. With the radios, I noticed that sometimes you could spend a little more money, and you can get one with GPS built into it. Use DSC. Is that something you recommend? Why is that important? It's pricier. So am I going to use that? And what are the benefits of that if somebody's kind of on the fence? Like, do I get a basic radio or do I get that added to it? What does that do?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that's an individual decision. You know, it's a nice option to have. Oftentimes, you know, we in my experience, I've come across those and they're more accidentally set off, you know. So we go out and we'll look for, I don't know, a sailboat because it's typically registered to somebody, right? Another thing to think about is the cartels will use those to send the Coast Guard in a different direction so that they can smuggle humans, drugs, whatever they're doing across the border. So those things go off a lot more often than we're actually pulling people out of water on them for.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. So if I did use one, you know, and it has it with it, what benefits does it offer me?
Well, what it'll do, it'll give out your position, right? It won't be a very accurate position, but it'll be a pretty decent general perspective of where you are at, because it triangulates. What it does is it's just taking your position off of different cell towers that are throughout the area, throughout the sector.
Okay. So if I'm in a situation where I don't know where I am because it's unfamiliar waters, or I've drifted, or the radio is really loud, it's really windy, and I'm not transmitting clearly, that's pretty helpful to send my signal to somebody.
Absolutely. And you know, the PLB will do that. And the advantage of the PLB over the marine radio is that it actually will like give your exact position down to, like, I mean, depending on the PLB, it could be up to a few feet, right?
Wow.
On how accurate it is. But I think both are great tools. I'm not knocking on the other one, because the other one does give out your position as well. And if it's attached to a GPS, it'll be even more specific, right? It'll be more accurate to your position.
Okay. Should I even carry a radio if I've got a cell phone? What are some of the reasons why one might?
Absolutely. A lot of people, including my dad, who's been rescued by the Coast Guard probably 4 or 5 times, like that's his main defense, right? He's got a radio that's probably not hooked up in his boat, goes out in the ocean, and his idea is, if I need it, I'll hook it up, right? And I'm talking about an installed mounted VHF radio, right? But my dad's old school, and he's very, what's the word? He's become a good case study for me over the years, you know, what not to do. But anyways, yeah, I think if you, the more that you have, like, I'm a big redundancy guy, right? So, you know, in my boat, I have 2 VHF radios, sometimes 3, because I'll bring a handheld. I've got 2 GPSs, I've got twin engines, I've got multiple fuel tanks. You know, I think in that way, right? I want to be able to self-rescue because, you know, the last thing I want to do is put anybody in harm's way to come out and help me if I made a bad decision, right? I'm not saying that I'm not willing to make a call to the Coast Guard. I'll do that, but I want to make sure that I've at least thought about how am I going to save myself first before I put, you know, you, your friends, or your loved ones in harm's way. And that's what we do when we make that call. When you make that call, you're setting wheels in motion that have consequences, and you may not realize it, but it does. And so, you know, if we're gonna be, you know, ocean enthusiasts, professionals, watermen, water persons, we want to be thinking along those lines. We want to protect the people who are going to be out there trying to help us when we've exhausted our options, right? When we've thought it out, we've done our part. We're always, you know, when I say we, I'm talking about myself when I was in the Coast Guard and as a lifeguard, like, we're coming to help regardless, right? But it's definitely feels good to know that, hey, this guy or this person, they did everything that they could to kind of prevent this situation, and they ended up in a bad situation. And it happens, right? It happens to all of us. Even the most prepared people are going to end up in shady situations. So it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I'm finding that, like, if we tend to rely on other people, that's never a good thing. Whether it's, oh, well, I've got the lifeguard or I've got the Coast Guard, they'll help. There's no doubt about it that they'll be there for me. But if they're maybe not able to help somebody else who's in more dire straits than I am on a crazy day, I'm pulling resources away. So the first thing we should not do is probably call for help unless we need the help. Don't get trigger happy with that Mayday signal. Know that it's there. Something I want to talk a little bit in a second about is how to do that process and radio protocol. But before I do that, just generally, when we bring equipment, we're bringing it maybe not for ourselves, but somebody in our group that needs it.
Sure.
And I'm sure you've come across some situations where somebody in the group had something, whether it was a goo pack or a water or who knows what, spare paddle, where I bet the person who had to borrow it from another paddler started carrying that on their own because they got saved by a buddy who had it for them that day.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So, you know, I mean, we've both been out in the water a lot and I've seen some things, and, you know, I always carry an extra rubber strapped around with me just in case I have to use that. It's great for tying things down. If I need to secure my rudder straight ways, you know, that's helpful as well. But you know, the one thing I would mention about radio use, and I think you asked this question, I didn't answer it earlier, was, you know, when you're using a VHF radio, oftentimes, right, it's probably, if you're using a radio for calling for help, you're probably going to be panicking a little bit, right? And just try to remember to stay calm in that moment, because you're trying to articulate to somebody who's very far away in this little box, this little office with no windows, what your situation is. And so they're trying to paint that picture based upon the information that you're sharing to them, right? And then they relay that message downstairs and they get the alarm sounded, and then the crew's going to be getting dressed out to come and get you. And then we're going to be asking questions about the situation as this thing progresses. So keep the radio far from your mouth. You don't want to be all up in the radio like this, because it gets muffled and you can't hear anything. If you look at the directions for most of our VHF radios, I use the icon. Yeah, you want to keep that thing. Oh, I can see it. Yeah, there you go. You want to keep that thing probably 8 to 10 inches away from your mouth, right? That's pretty far away.
That is far. Okay.
And you can hear it clearly. So this, not good. This, much better.
Really? I had no idea about that. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be super muffled. So that's something to keep in mind. Keeping the antenna straight up. You don't want it like down. You don't want it in the water. You want it straight up as possible and dry if you can. Yeah.
Does it help to hold it higher to try to get a signal?
Yeah, higher is better, but as long as you keep it upright, it should be fine, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it should be fine.
Gotcha.
Some of the towers are up on very high, you know, mountain tops and can pick up those signals. So you don't have to worry about, like, using the radio way up here. But you know, the higher up that you can get gives you a better line of sight is all.
Okay. That was super cool how you kind of painted the picture of what's going on to the person on the other side. So talking to the person who's doing our rescuing, there's a middleman. And so we got to be clear, because everything we pass to that person has to get passed to somebody else.
Sure.
So there's kind of like a communication chain that's happening here.
Absolutely. And the crew is going to be asking questions as well. So, you know, you got your radio man who's up there taking down the information from the call. It's going through a couple of filters up there in the ops center, and they're making a decision on what's the best resource to send out there. You know, is it, you know, U.S. boats? Is it the lifeguard service? Is it a Coast Guard asset in the area? Or should we launch a helicopter? Those types of things. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be going on. You know, when we're talking about way offshore stuff, then they're, you know, bringing in the big ships, and they'll figure out, like, you know, who's in the area to come and help. And normally it's a good SAM. You know, that's kind of the preferred method, right?
What do you mean by good SAM? What's that mean?
Maybe a boat nearby that's up on VHF and listening to channel 16. They can reach out and say, hey, is there any boats in the vicinity of La Jolla? You know, we have a paddler that's stranded. Would you mind providing some assistance? They're about this far away from you. You know, that kind of thing.
Got it.
So, yeah, good SAM is, fishing boat or, you know, something in the area.
So SAM for Samaritan, Good Samaritan?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay. So we're kind of creating a mesh then. We're working with all the boating community at this point as a paddler. It's not emergency services that somebody might come bail us out and rescue us.
That's right. Yeah.
That's cool. So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's chat then. I mean, you mentioned channel 16. That's the, as I understand it, that's the channel to go to. My radio in particular has a 16 and a 9 red button on it that it automatically jump to that channel, if I understand how it works.
Yeah.
Say I'm on
it'll toggle between both. Right?
Okay.
You can go between 9 and
And those are the channels to use if I'm in trouble. Do I ever talk on those channels otherwise? Do I ever do a radio check on those channels, or am I only listening at that point?
You're only that's for hailing in distress only, right? So channel 16 is for making contact, and then, you know, you would switch channels from there. So oftentimes, like us fishermen, like we have certain channels. A lot of us use CB radio, and we'll communicate that way, so we don't keep the radio waves clustered. And also we're passing secret information about our fishing spots, right? So the Coast Guard is, you remember, there's, you know, Sector San Diego is one office, right? And so they're taking a lot of calls coming from different areas. Sometimes they might even get tied into a 911 call. And I wanted to go back to your point about cell phones in a minute, but, you know, you want to initiate the call there. So if you want to make a Mayday call, you want to do that on channel 16, right? If you're in immediate distress and you need help, that's what you want to do. You want to get their attention, right? You don't just reach out to the Coast Guard. If you're in an emergency, you say Mayday, 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 right? But if you're just reaching out for information, I don't know, maybe you're trying to get the weather because your weather band radio isn't working or something along those lines. You know, and you see a weather pattern coming in, or anything, right? Or you see, let's say you see somebody in distress, but you're not in a position to help them, right? You see a flare go off while you're out there in the water. Something like that. You call the Coast Guard. You can call them by saying, you know, Coast Guard Sector San Diego, this is, and since you're on a canoe, you can say your name and that you're on a canoe. If you're on a boat, you would say the name of your boat. And then the Coast Guard will come back, you know, Clark, this is Coast Guard San Diego. What's the nature of your distress? You know, and then they're going to ask you, like, are you in any immediate danger right now? That sort of thing, right? But if you're calling in a flare sighting, just let them know what you saw in reference to where you were. That's going to be helpful, because they'll send an asset out there and come and take a look.
Got it.
Any information you can pass along will be helpful.
Let's chat about that Mayday call for a second.
Sure.
I was in a situation not too long ago where I made a call to emergency services to help with our group, and as I'm talking, I'm just wondering if I'm doing this right. It was honestly the first time I've had to use my radio in that manner before. I've done on channels communication, and I've worked at places where we've used radio comms, but what do I say? Can we simulate a call, or could you simulate a Mayday call for us, just using kind of some things that let's say your Yako snapped, you off at some location. Could you walk through that scenario for us? And you've tried to do everything on your part ahead of time, and you're now in a situation where you need assistance.
Sure. So what I would do is I would contact the Coast Guard. In that situation, I personally wouldn't make a Mayday call. I would probably just call because I wouldn't, I'm not in distress in the sense that, I feel like I'm in any immediate danger, right? If my Yaku breaks, my boat's still floating. Yes, I'm not going to be able to take the canoe home. I'm going to need some help, but I don't feel like I'm been put in any, imminent danger, right? At that moment, that could change, right? Things could escalate quickly. My boat sinks or something like that's a different story. If I'm not dressed appropriately, that's also a different story. If I'm too far to swim to the shore, those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. So I would call the Coast Guard. I'd reach out, say, Sector San Diego, this is Ty Aweau. I'm out here on my canoe. My gear is malfunctioned. This is my position. If I had a GPS on and I carry one on my watch, I would give them my position. I say, relative, I'm probably about 3 or 4 miles off of La Jolla. I need some help out here. And then they're going to ask me the question, do you have a life jacket? I'm probably going to say, no, I don't, that sort of thing. Right. So it just, the thought of making a Mayday call, I think, is appropriate, right? There's nothing wrong with making a Mayday call. I'm just saying, based on my own experience and my perspective in that situation, I probably wouldn't need to do it. Now if I was on let's say I'm out with a group, right? One of our paddle society groups, we're offshore or something like that. I would say, and one of our paddlers has, maybe a stroke or a heart attack or some kind of ailment or an injury, then I might be more inclined to use the Mayday, because I need to get the Coast Guard's attention right away and let them know, like, hey, we got something going on. And they're going to be all ears. Ears are going to perk up when they hear Mayday. If they hear a radio call, they're going to listen. Definitely. They're going to be all ears. But the Mayday call just kind of gets everybody's blood circulating a little bit more. So I kind of saved that one for more serious issue,
Okay.
An injured paddler or a medical aid issue or something like that.
So tell me what the word distress means when you're talking about the Coast Guard's ears or the emergency. When they hear distress, does that mean how urgent is that a word to use carefully?
Yeah, it's urgent. Yeah, it's urgent. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely got their attention. They're going to want to find out more specifics. They're not the ones that are in the water, cold, and not fully aware of your situation, right? And the reason why you called. So you, as the person in that situation, really have to do the best job that you can in articulating your current situation, right? Distress just meaning like, hey, my equipment's busted. I'm out of gas. My paddle broke. That sort of thing.
Okay.
And the number one thing they're going to ask you is, how many people are with you, right? Are you in a group, right? Are you by yourself? Because you send a crew out there, they're going to look for, they want to make sure everybody's accounted for. So be accurate in your numbers, right?
Okay.
And I would also say, after this thing's all over, make sure you communicate with the Coast Guard. Like, give them a call. There's nothing wrong with that. Say, hey, thank you for your help. Send them a letter. Like, I know my friends, from when we were working, we appreciate that a lot, in our community. And, it doesn't happen that often, and we help a lot of people, so when we do get a thank you, that's awesome. But it also gives you an opportunity to kind of debrief, right?
Yeah.
Because we send a crew out to come and help you, and we get you back, and that's typically the end of our interaction. Sometimes, I might know the person, and I'll reach out and say, hey, what was your perspective like, with us coming out there? And I've learned a lot just from talking to people, right? This one specific case I was on up in LA years ago, this group of lobster fishermen were heading out to Catalina Island, and their boat took on water and sank within a few minutes, right? Whoa. So these guys were divers. They thought to themselves, water's cold. This is December 5th, right? They're thinking water's cold. We need to grab our wetsuits. So just that thought of, hey, before the boat sinks, let's get our bag of wetsuits so that we can put our wetsuits on. And one of the guys had a VHF radio that he didn't know at the time. It was handheld, but it wasn't waterproof. Was able to get out a brief Mayday, right? Brief, like I'm talking like May, you know, and then it broke. Yeah. And then the other diver had a PLB. And it's that PLB that really got our attention. You know, the Mayday we launched, and then the PLB started pinging, and it gave us, you know, a direction to head in. And when we got on scene, that PLB also had a built-in strobe light, which is an awesome signaling device. I recommend everybody carry a strobe light. They were great. Say again?
Why is strobe light being so helpful?
Well, I mean, especially if you're out near the evening time, right? In the middle of the day, it's not going to be all that helpful, but, you know, a signal mirror will be more helpful. But at night, if we're out there searching for you, and you have a strobe light and we're on night vision goggles, we can see you from many miles away, and we will get you. The ocean is a big, dark place at night. So, you know, the more you stand out, the better it's going to be for your chance of survival and for us to find you, you know? So signaling device, I love how the Cali paddler has all the bright caps and the shirts and all of that. That's all great stuff. Signaling devices are great. Yeah.
Good to hear. Yeah, I'm learning that the 80s are back, baby. We're bringing neon back.
It's good. It's good.
and I'm seeing a lot of paddlers. We look like a bunch of Skittles when we got to a start line now, and that's
yeah, that's right.
There's no stigma with being bright out there. Like
me myself, I like to be the ninja. I like that guy who hides out.
Well, and I come from surfing where nobody wants to stand out. Everybody's wearing a black wetsuit.
Right.
Look like a bunch of seals bobbing in the water.
That's right.
But paddlers are taking it a little differently. And
yeah, no, for sure. And, you know, getting back to that story, you know, the one lesson that I pulled out of that story was from the time frame that these guys entered the water to the time that I got there and pulled them out of the water was almost 2 hours.
Wow.
2 hours they were in the water, right?
Jeez.
And that's how long it took all of this to kind of work its way through the fact of us getting launched and then going out there and all of that in there. So nobody wants to be in the water for 2 hours without a wetsuit in December. So, you know, getting that, having that thought to dress appropriately, protect themselves from the elements, really save them. But it also, the lesson that I took away is, so we came on scene and we hear the POB, you know, because we're DFing on it, and which means direction finding.
Okay.
See the strobe light. We fly over these guys. We do a low pass. We kind of, you know, do a little wave, and then we come around in a big circle. So we have to go through this brief before we deploy our swimmer. So as we're doing this brief, it seems like it takes forever, right? So if you've already been in the water for like almost 2 hours, and then, you know, the Coast Guard's there, but you're not sure if they saw you, you know, because they flew right over you, and then we did this huge orbit, you know, they thought we missed them, you know, so they were kind of panicking.
Sure.
And so they were able to tell me this after the fact. And I said, that's a good point. I was like, next time maybe we'll just kind of cruise up, give a good signal, shine our lights on, make sure that, you know, we see you and we're coming for you, you know, that kind of thing. I think that just gives you kind of that nice, warm and fuzzy. You know. Yeah, they were terrified. They had thought about swimming to Catalina Island. They were like 8 miles from Catalina, you know, like that wasn't going to happen. And they stuck together. They tied themselves together, which was also a good idea.
Tell me about that. Tell me about
water. If you're in the water for a long period of time, I mean, not even a short period of time, if you're not secured, right, as a unit, you're going to drift apart. And it's harder for us to find you when you're apart like that, right? You want to stick together. You've heard that term, like stay with the boat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's great advice, right? You know, that should be kind of the rule of thumb, you know, is stick with the boat, stay with the big floaty stuff, right?
That's helpful. Okay, cool. Go into the radio communications, some don'ts. You mentioned some really good stuff. You said give them as much information as you can. Is there a balance where you're talking too much because maybe it's hard to hear you? Like I was out on a day. Can you hear me when I'm holding it from 8 to 10 inches away with the wind, or do I need to kind of try to protect myself? Do I need to talk in short sentences, or is it okay to blah, blah, blah?
You're going to want to talk in short sentences, right? Because they're going to be writing all that down. You know, and yes, the wind could be a factor for sure. It could. That's something to be mindful of. And like you said, if you do, you know, if you are in that kind of situation, you may want to kind of turn your head so that you know, have a better communication with sector. But yeah, as long as you're talking, they're going to ask you questions. If you can't hear them, you know, for whatever reason, you can't hear them, just remember those things I was talking about, right? Number of paddlers, your location, if you have it, and the nature of your distress, right?
Okay.
Those are the things you really want to get out there so that they will get the wheels turning.
Say those 3 again for me.
You want to know your number of paddlers, the location of, if you have it available, and the nature of your distress.
Got it.
Those are the big things.
Okay. If we were to add something else to that, a description of what we're wearing or the craft.
Yeah, for sure. And life jackets, if you have them, they're going to ask you to don them.
Okay.
That's kind of step one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, any other information that you have that you think would be helpful, right? I'm right off of La Jolla Point, or I'm right off of OB Pier, something like that could be helpful. You know, like
Okay.
your last known location, where you believed you were. You might not be. Sometimes we rescue people that are not where they thought they were. You know? So that's something to keep in mind, right? So having a GPS position is much more accurate and much more helpful. So I can't stress that enough.
Okay. Yeah, the radios with that built in seems kind of nice because it's if my hands are cold, let's say I hoolie and my thumbs start working, because that's something I noticed when I start getting cold. My digits, my dexterity is not as good. I found that the radio is nice to operate as opposed to a screen, like a cell phone. Hands aren't wet, it's not slippery, I'm worried about dropping it. Radio's got a little thing they put around my wrist and it floats. Radios float. I did lose one Mission Bay channel that does not float, so you have one that floats.
Sure.
But just those things are like when you get cold that we don't maybe account for, that make it hard to do stuff. Talk, send in my coordinates. If I've got a radio that can do that for me, that seems pretty good. Yeah. For sure. Absolutely. You're absolutely, I 100% agree with you on that. And that was one thing I was going to say about the cell phone was, you know, cell phone's great. Bring it with you. But please, I can't say this enough. Don't let that be your only line of communication with the outside world or with help, you know, because so many things can go wrong with that cell phone. I know a lot of cell phones are waterproof these days or water resistant, but still, you know, they're very hard to hear when you're on the water like that with the wind. And if you do get it wet and it doesn't work and that's your only option, well, I mean, if you don't have a PLB or any backup option, you're in a bad spot, right? Right. So yeah, but yeah, a lot of people are paddling with Pelican cases that, you know, have their cell phones in it and whatnot. And I think that's great, you know, but I would caution against that being your only device for communication. Okay. Yeah. Like you said. And tie everything in, you know, I see a lot of people just kind of stick it under their bungees. That's one way to do it. But if you're going to go out in any kind of conditions, little lanyards of type 1 nylon cord, you know, gutted, would work great. You just tie it in. That way it's always attached. And it's better if it's attached to you, right? Just in case you get separated, right? So there's a lot of like camelbacks that are sacks. I've seen some that are vests that have all these little pockets. Like, figure out what works for you, you know? And again, you don't have to use these things every time you go out. And I mean, I wouldn't, you know? But when you make a risk assessment before a paddle, consider your options and have some tools available for you, right? One of the big things I noticed is a lot of guys are starting to push the limit. There's more and more people paddling one-mans, which I think is great and I'm excited about. But when people are starting to push the envelope, you know, when they're trying to do these gnarly downwinders, that's a whole different ball game. And I think it needs to be looked at that way, right? It's like the guys and gals that brag, right?
doing their risk assessment, right? They have jet skis on scene. That's something you might want to consider. You might want to consider an escort boat, right?
Okay.
Or a jet ski. If it's a gnarly day, that could be extremely helpful, you know, and you can self-rescue, right? You're putting yourself in a hairy situation. You know, not everybody has the resources to do that, obviously, but if you can, it's not a bad idea. You know, it's not something, I think you should take that into consideration. So
Good stuff, man. One other radio question, and I think that was the last of the questions for that, is when we're paddling, do we keep the radio on, or do we only turn it on as needed?
it's a personal decision. I mean, you know, if you want to listen to what's going on, I can tell you that if you're on channel 16, the Coast Guard is going to be jabbering away, and ships are going to be making calls, and you're going to hear occasional pom-pom from the Coast Guard about, you know, a hazard or something out there that's happening, maybe a faraway gale. I think it's unnecessary personally, but that's a personal choice, I would say.
Okay. If I'm in a group and we pick a channel to communicate on, is that okay? Just we make sure we pick a pleasure channel, recreational channel.
Yeah, exactly. Pick one of those pleasure channels where it's a rec channel and you can communicate for sure. If you're in a group and you think there's going to be any kind of distance or something like that, it's a great idea. That's what they're for, right? VHF radio, communicate. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in some situations where you're not far away, but it's strong enough you cannot hear each other. You can't call the person up ahead, hey, stop, we've got somebody behind us that's just stressed, I'm going to stay with them. And that person just keeps going, or they stop and they just keep floating forward because of the wind. Now we're getting a big gap and they can't hear my voice, even though they're not that far away yet.
Sure. Would you mind, I heard a little bit about your story. Would you mind sharing some of the details?
Oh, which story? I got lots of stories.
No, the one more recently.
So we had a paddler, we had a good group, very competent people, and we had equipment malfunction. And the equipment malfunction was a rudder cable breaking. We regrouped. We were able to get everybody on the same page, come together, and we tried to fix it. We used some paracord. We re-rigged. So I went up alongside and we re-rigged the rudder and strung it up to the paddle. But it's hard to tie knots when your hands are cold and wet. Gusty wind and you're bumping around and you're trying to not drop a knife to cut it. And so there was a lot of things that just made that process.
Oh God, yeah.
Fixing it was hard. It took a long time. And so we're sitting there not moving, getting a little chilly. We kind of got it working, but it wasn't perfect. We got it to turn and maybe hold a line, but we needed the winds were strong enough that wasn't good enough. And so we made a call to try to limp back home. And at that point, we had 5 of us. A portion with a radio went on ahead, continued the run, and then 2 of us stayed with a radio, wounded craft. And maybe that was a good call, maybe it wasn't. The line of thinking we had was that let's not put more people in a situation that's bad, but let's also not leave the wounded vessel alone. And so we tried to limp home, ran into some more equipment problems. The rudder was starting to get even more wonky. We couldn't lock it with a rubber tie. At a hoolie. As we're sitting there kind of communicating what our plan is, do we go to the beach or do we go upwind back home? And then we had a hoolie, so now we're cold. We're starting to have more exposure. I looked at the Garmin afterwards. It was a good 45 minutes of kind of trying to fix, trying different routes of limping home before the hoolie happened. And then that happened and we had seats flying, like the seat flew away. Just it flew bar quick, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And things, that's typically how it goes. Like things escalate quickly. Thank you for sharing that story. Sounds like you guys crushed it. And you did what you had to do, right? In those situations.
We tried our best. We had a lot of good dialogue. It was, so we had to be close to kind of communicate. But in the end, we were out of our ability to self-rescue, and we were really glad to have the option of the radio. And what I did is I started on 16 and I did a Mayday call. And then I remembered I got this little SOS button. And so I used that afterwards, and it switched me off the radio comms onto a distress screen, which kind of was a little disconcerting. I didn't know if they were hearing me because I couldn't see the radio on 16 anymore.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I did hear some
Mhm.
feedback, but it was very windy and hard to hear them. So I was worried that they weren't hearing me clearly. Again, these were all things that were going on in the middle of turbulence and crafts not bumping into each other. It was a good learning experience.
Sure.
We were really close to shore, not really close, probably 2 miles offshore, with
Okay.
vision of good quality landmarks.
Mhm.
And it still felt like a long time. And I don't think it was long, but it felt like a long time before help arrived, because in that moment, I can't imagine those lobster divers. That was a long time. This was not nearly as long, but it just felt that way. Like, I hope they heard me. How do I know? And then I got a call back. Confirmation. We've got your location. We're sending Mission Bay lifeguards. And so they were able to communicate what I could be looking for. And that was kind of gave me a good feeling of what I needed to know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
so they came and they did an amazing job. And the rest is for beers in the parking lot talk.
No, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's when you're in those types of situation, I feel like we can prepare ourselves, right? We can do our best to prepare ourselves. You had a radio, which is great. You had some tools to work with to fashion kind of this MacGyver rig. That's all great stuff, and you tried to solve it yourselves, which is another good plus. So you guys crushed it, Clark. Honestly, as far as becoming proficient at being rescued, well, the only way to do that is to either practice in your garage or get rescued a lot. Like my dad, he's a professional be rescue guy, right? Yeah, and I got some stories for parking lot ginger beer about that. Put some context into it. So
I love it. I look forward to those. Yeah, and it was the radio talk that I really felt like we got so many paddlers now that are taking the next step. We're being smart with the equipment, but do we know how to use it? Like manual that my radio is 80 pages long. It's tiny font, and it's I turn it on and I'm like, okay, I'm good to go, right? But I don't think I knew what I was doing as well as I should have. And this chat with me and you, a lot of people get the same benefit. As I want to make sure that once we have the right equipment, we know what we're doing with it. It's
I was gonna say, so that's a good point that you bring up about the radio and how to operate it, because yes, those manuals are tiny font, super thick in multiple languages, right? Very intimidating. But I will tell you this, like, get proficient at your radio. You as an individual radio operator, they're all different, right? A little bit different. So, if you have several, you're going to want to become proficient at the ones that you're using, right? The one that you use most often. In addition to that, I would suggest getting a little lanyard, tying it to your radio, and having a laminated direction card. How you turn the radio on, how you transmit, how to adjust the volume, all these things that are going to be very helpful in that situation, because you might be proficient at using that radio, but it might be the only radio in your group, and you might be the one with the issue. You might have a health issue or something like that. So if somebody in your group can grab a hold of that radio, pull out that card and be like, okay, this is how you turn it on. This is how I adjust the volume. That would be helpful in that situation. So
that's, if I'm incapacitated and I can't talk and I got to hand it to somebody else. Okay. Yeah. You mentioned like a little lanyard with information. Should we be paddling with personal information, identification stuff?
It wouldn't hurt, especially if you're doing something outside of the normal. If you're doing one of those long distance paddles where you're outside of, the bay, far away, definitely, right?
Okay.
Carry as much with you as you feel is. You don't want to load. You got a 16-pound boat. You don't want to load 20 pounds of gear in that thing, right? But take the things that you think. If I'm in a situation like this, and that includes what you're wearing. Like if I go in the water and I'm in the water for 45 minutes. Am I going to be comfortable in board shorts in 55-degree water for an hour? And the answer is no, so, you're going to want to dress the part based on the conditions, I would say.
Good stuff, man. I have to listen to this interview like 5 times to capture it all and really get all the goodness that you're throwing at us. Thank you. Anything else you want to leave us with before we let you go on your day?
I would just say thank you again for the opportunity to come on here and share any pearls of wisdom that I may have shared with somebody. Hopefully somebody has learned something today. If not, it's all good. That means you're doing your work and your research and you're ready to go out there and push yourself. So thank you, Clark, for hosting this and
Thank you,
doing
Ty.
your best to educate the public, because I think this is important conversation to have. And you know, based on the most recent events, maybe we're not, you know, having these conversations enough. So thank you for starting this.
Yeah, you bet. I'll geek out on this all day long, buddy. Any chance
Right on.
to hang out with you is always fun. Let's go for a paddle soon. And
Anytime.
right on, man. I'll talk to you real soon. Have a good day.
Okay. Aloha.